Ladies and gentlemen, please welcome Senior Vice President, Chief Security Officer and Trust Officer, Cisco, John Stewart.
I hope you guys are wide awake, because poetry at that hour of the morning is something I never thought I would hear at RSA. And I was smiling in the back thinking, how do you follow that? Well, part of what I wanted to celebrate was the fact that being here at RSA in 2019, to me, is one of the paramount possibilities of my career. To actually talk to you for about 20 minutes about the state of the cybersecurity industry as it is right now. Part of the situation we face in this year is that we're looking at new business consumption models, the emerging technologies that you all face, AI, ML, every letter you can imagine, so much so that you have to be an acronymonologist, actually, in order to figure out exactly what they all mean. By the way, look that one up in Webster's. Vulnerabilities are up 20% by all accounts. We have more threats. We have more costly breaches each and every single year. The speed, complexity, intensity of the attacks that we're facing has just challenged every part of our industry again in another year. We've had 80,000 new jobs open in the last year that we can't fill. We don't have enough people to fill them. We don't have enough trained people. And as you can see again this year, we have more vendors, we have more solutions, including from us, and frankly, are looking at a little bit of the same results. Just this week, 5 new startups started, 4 shut down because they ran out of money. We had the first combination attack where you actually hit multiple sectors at the same time just this week, and we had 50 million data records hit. We had at least 2 board directors that are under civil lawsuits, and we've had 4 executives fired for breaches. In this week alone, we've all been sitting here. And by the way, one government attacked another one publicly. Just last month, Cisco launched the annual cybersecurity report for 2019. And by the way, the conclusion is that we are completely screwed, even more than we were last year. Congratulations, welcome to RSA. That's exactly the speech I didn't want to give. That's precisely the speech that I have no interest in spending any time next year, and anybody on this stage should not have to give. I imagine you've heard that speech plenty. In fact, I think RSA now hands out buzzword bingo cards for all of us that are actually talking to get a sense of what, in fact, will be different. None of us keynoting should give you that same old speech. None of us should actually be talking about the threat landscape being bigger and larger and no problem, we've had an attack here. And the truth of it is, for having done this for about 30 years, it feels like at times we're trapped in that sort of textbook definition of insanity where we're doing the same things and getting exactly the same results and not making enough progress as a result of it. In short, is the work that we're doing actually going to be enough to stop the problems faster than they're growing? Now, I appreciate how hard this is. I've been operating and protecting networks for probably odd 30 years. And in the end, believe I actually don't feel like we're doing enough yet for all the hard work you all go through. So as I stare at it, I think all of us have to ask 3 questions. I ask them of myself. And the first is, where are we today? Where are we going, and is it the right direction? And what role does every single person in this room, be it from government, education, be it from commercial institutions, people on stage, people sitting in the audience, people in the booths, companies, leaders, operators, hackers? Because we're critically dependent on technology. And we're protecting it in a way that isn't effective enough yet. So my conclusion to the question, where are we now? Where do we have to go? And what is everybody going to do is going to look like this. And I think you have to have answers to the questions that I just posed. Not my answers. They have to be yours. Because right now, if an attacker could be inside a network for 146 days before they're seen, and we're not tapping into half the population in order to get diverse teams to fill the jobs that are already growing and far too many of them that exist, that in fact we don't demand vendors develop products with security in mind, I would argue that we're making the future worse, not better. So my conclusion about this is let's stop that madness. We have to think about different ideas. We have to go a different direction. We have to try something different than we have tried before. And think of it this way. If we had 1 year until 2019, the real 2019, what could you do in 1 year if you essentially wiped the slate clean and started over? Now that's where imagination comes in, where you actually imagine where you're going and then find out how to get there as you do it. So imagine this. Imagine a world where we could actually anticipate when an adversary is going to attack us. Imagine where the cost to attack is actually more than the cost to defend, or the risk is higher. Imagine a world where we actually know our systems better than the adversaries do, which seems to be the case pretty regularly. And what if you could have a 5 petabyte data array pulling 300 terabytes of information from around the world, and you could figure out how to stop or preemptively stop an attack before it was effective in hours, minutes, and maybe even right at the same time that it started? Would you feel better? I know I would. And then imagine a world where we've actually built teams based on the strength of diverse thinking. Not because it's politically correct, but because in fact it actually produces higher value, where we're filling the jobs being created faster than they're being created. If those diverse perspectives and the different thinking actually come up with different outcomes than we've had in the past, because in fact we need them now. That changes the game in 1 year. Then imagine a world where in fact you could, I don't know, trust a vendor. What a thought. Where in fact you know that the companies that you work with and the colleagues that you are working with in them care just as much about security in anything they do as you care about it in your job. That in fact you challenge the status quo of, hey, I'm just buying it because it's a good company brand or because I need it today, but you actually know that it was developed with security in mind. Now, everything I just described is extremely possible. You just have to decide it's going to happen, and you have to then, as a result, make it happen. So how do you get there from here? So, though I take no pride in what I'm about to say, I travel about 300,000 miles a year on airplanes. I would highly recommend not doing that. But that said, one of the things that I get a unique advantage to be able to do is spend time in many countries and see the remnants of what's actually started in multiple countries around the world that is effective, that is actually working. And some of that good work, in fact, includes arrests of those that have broken in and done damage. Some of it, in fact, includes the fact that we've got penalties that are rising for taking attacks and harming other businesses. Frankly, there's a lot of those that we can learn from and build upon. The key thing I do think, with high degree of confidence, though, is that despite all the newspaper articles, and whether or not we want to admit it or not, we're in all of this together. Government, companies, citizens, vendors, you, me. And despite the chasms that seem to be being built, we actually have to find the common ground to make differences in a hurry. Because ultimately, success leaves clues. And failure leaves clues too, and I actually would prefer to look at the success part because I'm too competitive to lose. Now let's talk about a little bit the cybersecurity skills gap that we're facing today. Part of what we're facing right now is that by 2021, 3.5 million jobs are going to be available in cyber that don't yet have the capacity to be filled. And there are those who would argue technology is going to solve all of this and we don't need those people. I think all of you would prefer that that's not the case. But I also don't believe it. I believe that people are essential. And yet, 11% of the cybersecurity workforce today, probably in this room, it's 11% is women. 11. Now the global workforce is about half, and we have 11% in this field. And the highest concentration in the world in this domain is actually here in the United States. We're in the technology world, 48% of the workforce is women, and we have 14% that are actually in cyber. We have role models. We have proof of incredible leadership from women. Sarah Andrews, Melissa Hathaway, Teresa Payton, Marianne Davidson, Judy Novak, Myrna Soto. And we lost one this past year in Becky Pace, who is an industry leader and an icon that I want to make her proud, and I think all of you should too. It's just a partial list, and it's not about this politically correct thing. It's not just in vogue to actually go after this problem. It's actually strategy. Partially because it's an undertapped community that we could hire from, and partially in all candor because scientifically it's been studied that diverse inputs to teams make them better. And if nothing else, our adversaries cover all walks of life. You can be a hacker no matter who you are. So why not have the same kind of thought process of all diversity in the very teams that we have? I think it actually switches the advantage to our side, because unilateral thinking quite possibly got us to where we are now. And diverse thinking, I have a tendency to believe, is going to get us out of it. By the way, if you want to know some of the rest of those outcomes, feel free and drop a note, because I'll tell you my own team's experiences in many of these examples. But I want to talk about global examples of changing this entire dynamic. And the first one, give an incredible shout out to the Girls Go CyberStart that just happened this year. 18 governors got behind a program that was led by SANS and had an incredible backing of an innovative skill and technique and test and game that brought 6,000 high school girls into the cyber world in basically a one-week contest. You're going to hear a little bit more about that, so I don't want to steal all the thunder. But the idea is that next year, all 50 states are going to be participating. 20,000 girls. In high school, into college, and hopefully all the way into the workforce that I just mentioned we need them in. Women in Cybersecurity, it's in its 4th year, WSIS. It was an NSF grant. It's now a 501c. It's actually not-for-profit. And the attendees have jumped by 200%. It doubled this year for the programs that they put in place. And then and I challenge all the other companies sponsoring this conference to do exactly what we did. We put $10 million to work 3 years ago, actually technically about 2.5 years ago, and have now gotten to a place where we have 19,000 students in programs for cyber. And I wish I could dive into every single thing that's on this page. There's no chance. If you don't know what these are, if you haven't had a chance, I would ask you all to get involved in at least one of them. That can change between now and a year from now what we face. And now the eminently difficult word to imagine. What is trust? I think trust is one of those things you actually know when you have it, and you're very convinced when you don't. And by the way, if you've lost it, someone will point that out to you. Systems are being attacked right now. The very critical life systems we have, be it the financial sector, be it the information systems, social media, they're all being attacked today. And yet we really do need to trust those. They're essential to get through the day. In 2015, I published a blog and wrote a paper that essentially said, why is it that we're just trusting vendors because we buy the product but don't say, hey, look, how did you develop it? How did you actually make sure that you cared about it the way I do? Because I'm going to rely on you to do many, many things with who and what you build. I actually think embedded security has to be challenged into the vendor community, where essentially you as vendors or as consumers are saying, I think this matters to me just as much as the fact that it's cool, it's this color, or it's this particular painting. I need to change your thinking, Mr. or Mrs. Vendor, to have security in mind. We actually have customers that are demanding this now. We have a global service provider that challenged our company and said, in very comprehensive terms, you would best do this right, and when it goes wrong, you'd best handle yourself correctly. So my takeaway from that one is security and privacy are actually going to be pivoting fairly soon, if not already started, to where vendors are going to differentiate with you on whether or not we do it right or not, and how we handle ourselves when things go wrong. Now this is a whole lot of hard work, but I also want you to remember something that a good friend of mine tells me regularly, which is don't ever confuse hard work with results. Why do I say it? Well, despite all of the hard work I just described, I'm going to give you some information that would suggest that we are not doing enough still by showing you what we're facing in data. By data, I mean objective information that essentially paints a picture. So this year, 2018, we now have nearly half the planet connected to the internet in some way, shape, or form. A smart device, certainly a PC, a laptop, etc. That went from less than 7% of the population 18 years ago. Half the world is connecting to the internet now. By next year, all projections being counted, malware that is in the form of ransomware went from a $300 million business to an $11.5 billion nightmare just by next year. By the way, if you do the math, if you're really truly math geeks, you'll realize that at the moment, because of that opportunity, every 14 seconds a new type of attack in ransomware has been launched because there's so much possible money involved. By 2020, and I remember very distinctly when there was a discussion that said, hey, 50 billion devices are going to be connected on the internet by 2020. I think it was, anybody saying it was laughed right out of the room. Now all projections suggest that it's about 200 billion IoT devices of some type are going to be connected to the internet in 2 years. 26 IoT devices per person. However, the number of insecure, non-development with security in mind devices joining the internet has far exceeded the number that were designed with security in mind. That's a trend line that will tell you why I think we need to do more. And last, but certainly not least, the amount of cybercrime went from $3 trillion all counted as best as anyone can count it, and it's going to double by 2021. This is not a commercial to get into the cybercrime world. How messed up is that? Are you okay with it? I'm not. It's not like we didn't try and stop this, but look at what the data is telling me and what I think the data should tell you. We're the leaders, we're it, we're the ones. We're the ones that actually have to turn these tides. So the question then becomes, how do you build through the positive actions to change what the data shows? And this is where I think we are historically in time. The boardroom, governments, people, citizens, everyone's awake to this. The level of knowledge and insight towards cyber right now is the highest I've ever seen. And we're going to essentially be remembered for creating some of these challenges and ultimately be remembered if we've fixed some of them. Crazy ideas. What happens if all of a sudden we suggest that all countries should ensure that clean devices are connecting to the internet? What happens if we figure out a way to help service providers be successful and also filter malware off the internet? And then what happens, and this is always important, my dad always said this to me, what happens if you don't do it? Well, what if I believe is going to happen is if we don't control this outcome, there's going to be disruptive events, including strange laws and regulations, that are going to push it. GDPR and the European NIS Directive are essentially first indicators that we have something going on right now which says we have to do more, and since the industry hasn't, we're going to start putting regulations into play. I'm not arguing against it. I'm just suggesting that if we don't take control of our destiny, it's going to be taking control for us. Now, I think you all believe that the security is a mission-critical element of our world. That's probably why you're here at RSA. That and all the parties. I get it. I think we also have to do something which is uncomfortable. We have to bring and talk to people that, frankly, we don't usually talk to. We don't usually talk to government leaders. We don't always talk between security and IT teams. We have to bridge chasms. Because it's not about holding this information close and saying, hey, it's security, we got to keep it tight, we can't let you know. It's about bringing other people into the discussion. And in case you don't have any ideas on how to do some of this, I have 10 ideas. And the first is certainly knowing you better than the adversaries do. The second is the multiplier effect pledge, where you can sponsor another person and help them in their career. The third, frankly, is change the vendor game and say that security has to be part of their development process as part of your conclusion to buy from them. And the fourth, and never to be underestimated, is you've got to demand, truly demand, explicit trust in this discussion with the people and companies you work with. So pick one, pick three. I'd be interested to see if you pick all 10. And I'll be interested to talk to you in a year, give a very different speech than I started with, and change where we are going before it changes on us. Thank you very much for spending 20 minutes with me.